Happy Friday, everyone. First part in our Fellowships Friday series, we're going to be talking about pursuing graduate study abroad. My name is Kyle Mox. I'm Associate Dean for National Scholarships at ASU, and I'm joined here today by Dr. Lori Stoff and Dr. Neelanjana Bhattacharya, both of whom are faculty mentors in the ANSA program as well. So key takeaways for today. I think it's always good to know what it is we're about to learn. But there's a lot of information that's about to come your way, but really just want you all to appreciate and leave here understanding that graduate study abroad can be a life-changing and career-changing opportunity. Of course, graduate study of any kind can do that. But I hope you appreciate the differences of how international graduate study can maybe take that in a slightly different direction. And it is feasible. A lot of people don't even consider it because they're like, oh, it's too complicated. There's no way I could even figure this out. It's not worth the trouble. It is feasible. It's very feasible, and it's increasingly feasible every year. But some research and planning is required because there are some key differences, right? So just to give you some context, I recognize some names in our chat here today, but many of you, this might be the first encounter that you're having with the Office of National Scholarships Advisement. And we exist at ASU to provide advising and support for ASU students at all our campuses, both graduate and undergraduate, online and campus immersion, and even alumni on applying for any kind of external award. So any award that does not come from ASU, any kind of funding source from outside of the university, we most likely are the point of contact for that. So national scholarships are different than what you might think of as regular scholarships or scholarships that you might get from ASU. As I mentioned, they're coming from maybe federal agencies, maybe foreign governments, nonprofit organizations, NGOs, things like that. They are all mission driven, so they're created by whoever funds them to achieve a specific purpose, such as creating a pipeline of well-trained scientists, or creating a pipeline of people who are conversant in critical foreign languages, who want to work in the foreign government, or just people that are good ambassadors and could represent the U.S. well, right? So everyone has a mission in mind when they create the funding for these sources. So that's important to keep in mind as you're considering strategies for application. Because the pools are very large, open to everyone, not just students at ASU, the selection rates can be pretty slim, and therefore that high level of competition does create quite a bit of prestige. It's worth bragging about if you get an award that only 3% of applicants receive. So it's very important that we understand the criteria for these awards. You work with us to understand exactly what it takes to be a strong candidate for these. So we do that through one-on-one advising. We spend a lot of our time, it's not that visible to the outside world, but we spend hours every week working one-on-one with applicants, as well as we've been doing a lot more group advising because we found that sort of access and community building has been very helpful for our students. We do a lot of writing feedback. We will work with you on your essays. We do workshops. We even have open writing hours, all kinds of resources to make you a stronger writer. And if you're selected for an interview for anything, you can also work with us to prepare for that. So we have a bunch of practice interviews scheduled over the next couple of weeks for many of our students. And we'll even work with your faculty to write stronger letters of recommendation or to help mentor you as well as possible. And then if it's an award that does have a nomination requirement, we'll manage that process. We'll help you through that process to get the university endorsement that you need. So we're going to take a basic journalistic approach here today. We just did the who, I guess, and so now we're going to talk about what. So what are we talking about exactly with graduate degrees? And I think the first topic of conversation really needs to be, how do foreign graduate degrees differ from American ones? Largely not that much, right? There are two basic models for higher education in the world, and they're really based on the British model of sort of the residential college and the German Research Institute. And the American version is sort of a combination of those two, where we have people that come to a campus and they'll stay there in a dorm or something like that for 4 years. But then we also have large, well-funded research groups and labs and degrees and graduate degrees. And so we've taken the best of both worlds. And bouncing back around, the rest of the world has kind of followed suit for that. The higher education is largely the same in most countries. What may differ is how people get there. And so, for instance, a bachelor's degree in the UK is a 5-year degree. And people become specialized much sooner than they do elsewhere. Other people might start their secondary education earlier, or they might stay in it longer. And so you'll have to figure out exactly where do you place as you're looking at criteria. You know, what is your equivalency, so to speak? Um, you know, we're all familiar with bachelor's degrees, but, you know, and we've probably all heard of master's and PhD degrees. But when we start looking at foreign universities, we might see an alphabet soup of all these different types of degrees. I think the important distinction to make is, you know, what is the process for receiving this degree? And so the three big categories for conventional graduate degrees are taught masters, masters by research, or doctoral degrees. And taught masters are exactly what they sound like. You might see Master of Arts, Master of Science, LLM, which is a Master of Legal Studies, um, and I've Master of Lit. I've seen a lot of different combinations, but the point is you want to focus in because taught masters means that you are enrolled in classes, you're taking seminars, you're reading, you're going to write a big paper, probably as sort of thesis or what in the UK they call a dissertation, which is opposite to what we do. And it's basically conventional school as we're used to thinking about it, very similar to what you've done in your bachelor's education. Masters by research are either intended maybe as a MRes, which is a research degree that's intended to prepare you to do research as a profession. And so very likely you won't take any classes at all. You'll just jump into a research project of your own design under the supervision of a faculty member. Or an MPhil, which is intended to be a research degree that's a pathway to a doctoral degree. And so many people, when they begin a doctoral degree, might not finish, or at least for the first couple of years, they'll be considered an MPhil student. Or maybe somebody wants to get an MPhil and then pick up a doctoral degree later on somewhere else, right? So important to read and understand the difference whether you're looking at a research degree or a taught degree, because the experience would be very different and the types of things you need to talk about in your application would be very different. We all know doctoral degrees require a lot of research. And in most contexts, that means just that, just research. In the UK, you might see a DPhil, which is basically the same as a PhD. And essentially, you are stepping into learning how to be a researcher. They assume that you've got enough content knowledge, you've taken all the coursework you need to take. If you need to learn something, you will learn it on your own, but there's no coursework distribution. Whereas in the US, even PhD students do need to take a certain number of classes in order to progress in their degrees. You'll find a bunch of other things, though. You'll find postgraduate diplomas and graduate certificates. You might see these quite often for teaching qualifications outside of the US, and that's certainly something you could pursue. Postgraduate diplomas are typically going to be, 1 year or less. And I'd forgotten to mention on the previous slide, most master's degrees outside of the US are usually 1 year in length. Doctoral degrees in the UK are intended to be 3 years, but rarely are shorter than 4 years. And so you might find these postgraduate diplomas or postgraduate certificates, which are also types of graduate degrees, but not quite the same as master's degrees. You'll see increasingly business degrees, which, maybe a decade or 20 years ago were not that common outside of the US. An MBA is largely an American invention, but I'm seeing increasing numbers of MBAs at foreign universities. Oxford Said Business School is one key example. There are schools in Italy and Spain that also sponsor MBAs, or you might see executive MBAs, which would be intended for somebody with significant professional experience. MBAs are generally intended for somebody with 2 to 3 years of professional experience. EMBAs are for people much further along, maybe looking for a career shift. And a relatively new degree that we're seeing a lot of is Masters in Management. And this would be good for a younger student who maybe doesn't have a lot of professional experience, but is looking for advanced training in business. And then as well, you'll see professional degrees, law, medicine, architecture, anything that leads directly into a profession. By and large, if your intention is to work in one of those professional fields in the United States, you should not consider professional study outside of the United States. All of the certifications and requirements that, the bar, the med school exams, all of these things that you need to practice that profession in the US, even architecture, will not be satisfied by the training you get outside of the US. It's very difficult to come back that way. So I get a lot of students that say, oh yeah, I think I want to go to law school in the UK. I'm like, entirely different legal system. Unless you're going to practice in England or be a barrister, then probably not a good choice. So that's the what. Now we need to think about, well, why would you want to go after one of these degrees? So Audience participation time. Let's start brainstorming a little bit. What are, if you're here right now, you must have some form of why in your head. Why are you even considering a foreign graduate degree, right? What are some of the reasons? Go ahead and throw those in the chat. Sure, great. Want to just live in a different place. What else do we have? Yeah, develop our horizons, better worldviews, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Linguistics, an international perspective on linguistics, different cultures. Yeah, yeah, taking a look at the, a different perspective on politics and yep. Citizenship, yeah, that's a thing I not really discussing in this one, but it's certainly a good thing to consider. Yeah, exposure to knowledge. We want to get at a specific type of knowledge that's being taught elsewhere. Very good. Yeah, great. All these are great ideas, and these are ideas that I thought about too, as I really thought through, based on the students that I've worked with. What are some reasons why somebody would want to do this? One category of reasons might be due entirely to professional development, right? You want to work internationally, you want to work in the Department of State, or you want to work for a global NGO, or you want to be work in international law or something like that. Your long-term career plans involve working internationally. Well, then it would be sensible for you to get some international experience before you try to enter that. Um, you know, Spending significant time abroad as a student also allows you to improve your cross-cultural communication skills, which is key. That's KSA building right there. And as well, if you're in a non-English speaking country, chances are that you're going to pick up foreign language proficiency, even if your program is not taught in a foreign language, or if it's not if it is taught in English. So yeah, Bryce is saying, yeah, I want to teach teaching Spanish as a second language. Not only are you taking courses in Spanish, but you're living and working every day in Spanish, and so your proficiency is going to increase dramatically. So, and of course, prestige, right? It opens up your options well beyond what's available in the U.S. And there are a number of really wonderful universities all throughout the world, right? We're battling between Oxford and Cambridge to say who is the oldest in the UK, and to think about a university that's been in place since the year 1066, right? Uh, you know, there were people who may have been at the Battle of Hastings that walked through Oxford, right? And there's even older universities in Italy, in the Middle East. So, that prestige of having attended a world-class, world-renowned university, of course, is a nice resume boost. And there might be more personal reasons. Many of you mentioned just this idea of experiences, of growth, like wanting to have a different experience than most people will have. Um, the approach to education and research and inquiry is different in different cultural settings, right? So maybe you want to get a whole new approach to education that you might find in Germany or Spain or UK or Asia. There are some specializations that really are just better off studied there, right? And if I was an art historian, I certainly would love to work in Italy, right? And where you can actually go and see the artworks that you study, or maybe you have a narrow specialty and you're really interested in Mesoamerican art, and therefore, Mexico City would be a really great option for you. So absolutely pay attention to what do they do well there that they don't do as well everywhere else. And once you get in there and you start developing, friendships and professional partnerships with faculty members, you now have a global network, right? And which is a great thing to carry on into the rest of your life. And there are some logistical reasons too. As I mentioned, most of these master's degrees or postgraduate certificates are 1 year, right? And so in most cases in the US, you're looking at 2 years for a master's degree, if not 2.5 or 3. Doctoral degrees can span 8 years sometimes, depending on what school you're at. And that could mean potentially lower costs because the duration is shorter. As well, the tuition at foreign universities is often less than what it might be um, at universities in the US. So um, all things to consider that, it might seem counterintuitive that you would go to a different country to get a more affordable education. So pop in the chat, where do we want to go? If you could go anywhere right now, wave a magic wand, where would you go to school? Autumn's already got the university picked out. Great. Edinburgh, Scotland. Wonderful. Yeah, Germany, Japan, Tsinghua. All right. Yeah, Italy or Spain. These all sound like wonderful places. Nothing yet that makes me go, are you sure about that? England, Germany, Italy, yeah, all kinds of great options. Spain, Fantastic. Yeah, and there's a number of reasons. We have to think about what is the logic that we're going to use to narrow these options down. One, and probably the first thing you should consider is just the realities of language. Um, you don't necessarily have to go to an English-speaking country to get an English-based program. Increasingly, we are seeing English-based programs all throughout the world because of globalization being what it is. English has become the lingua franca, which is ironic if you understand what that phrase actually means, in education throughout the world. And so almost all of the graduate programs available in Taiwan, for instance, are taught in English. You can actually get an American based or American copacetic, if you want to call it that, medical degree in Taiwan in English for a fraction of the cost. And so obviously UK, Canada, Australia, all your Anglophone countries have degrees in English, but all throughout the European Union, we're seeing increasingly availability of English-based programs, and not necessarily because they're trying to attract Americans or our friends to the north to come and study there, but because if somebody speaks another language beside their native one, it most likely these days is English, because it's honestly an economically attractive option to learn how to speak. So in the EU, all throughout Northern Europe, we're seeing really wonderful options in all of the Scandinavian countries. Claire, for instance, found a really cool program in sustainable supply chain management in Finland. We've had students go to Sweden. Of course, Germany is a really great option. Any of the Northern European countries, of course, are all going to be English, and their English is often better than ours. As I mentioned as well, East Asia, particularly the more high-income countries, we're seeing a lot of English-based programs. Taiwan, as I mentioned, Singapore. Once we get into Japan, yes, your Japanese better be very good. So I'll just say that. Timing. So the one question is, when do I plan to do this? And when I'm asking when, I'm also thinking about, okay, when should I get started on this? What should my timeline be? Of course, by this point, most of you know that you don't have to go right from undergraduate into graduate school, right? It's perfectly acceptable and perhaps advisable to take some time off, maybe do a walkabout, work for a while, and then engage in graduate study when you feel well motivated. Other people are rip-roaring ready to go and they just want to get into it. So that's perfectly fine as well. So you need to figure out what timeline works best for you. Maybe you need to save up some cash. Maybe you have some family obligations. Any reason is a good reason. But once we get started, I really do think the process should start a year in advance. So when I'm saying December, that's working backwards from when most graduate admissions deadlines occur. One of the things you'll find is that foreign universities oftentimes have a shorter application window than American universities, just like their elections are often shorter than ours. So you might see that a British university's application window is only 2 weeks or 4 weeks long. So we need to pay attention to that. I've had a lot of students get caught off guard. Whereas in the US, graduate programs might open their applications in the summer and not close them until January. So do pay attention, but I think December is a good safe bet. So 12 months in advance, you're going to start thinking, what are my priorities and needs? So one of the items I'm going to share with you is actually a worksheet that I use with students to start identifying what are my priorities when it comes to post-bac education. Not everybody has the same priorities. Not everybody has the same goals with their education. So first thing you need to do is figure out what's the most important to me. You need to start searching for online for programs abroad. It's going to be a lot, right? There are thousands and thousands of programs. And so you just need to give yourself time to work through that large amount of material. You're not going to do this all in a weekend. Then as you start to narrow down in terms of countries or maybe types of programs, you can start using specific criteria to shrink your search. And so I'm also going to share with you a worksheet, another worksheet, but a spreadsheet that actually one of the students in this presentation developed for us years ago that actually allows you to compare and contrast universities on the basis of different categories, such as faculty renown, prestige of university, community engagement opportunities, all these things that matter as you're thinking about graduate study. 9 months before you submit your applications, you should make sure and see, are there any exams required? A really common question I get is, do these schools require the GRE or GMAT or something like that? Most often, no. The GRE is run by a private business. It's not like it's a public utility or something like that. Increasingly, graduate schools in the US are even getting away from it. So by and large, the standardized tests that we use for admission in the US probably aren't going to be in use there. What most foreign universities are going to expect, though, is evidence of English proficiency, assuming that you're going into an English language program. Because again, it's not just people from the US applying, it's people from all over the world. If you received a college degree in the US, you won't have to take an English proficiency exam. You can just claim that, yes, English is my native tongue, and I did an undergraduate degree in the US. That's almost always sufficient. I have seen some schools, particularly very competitive ones, require a GMAT, and there are some business schools abroad that will actually require the GMAT. Or I've seen programs like in economics require the subject test in economics from the GRE, which is very difficult as opposed to the GRE, which is not. Make sure you understand the requirements, right? This is not necessarily a time just to jump horses, right? Just because you're going to a foreign university doesn't mean that you've suddenly developed the ability to do multivariate calculus. So you have to be sure that you've read the requirements for that for entry, that you have them, and if not, you have a plan for getting them. So if there's any specific coursework or background required, if they expect you to have research or publications, you can kind of tell the competitiveness of a program based on what their admission requirements or expectations are. Take a look at their curriculum, make sure you understand what you'll be learning, what you'll be studying. This all sounds good to you. And very early out, do start thinking about, am I going to have to get a visa? Do I have a passport? Do I need to renew a passport? Do I need to get a new passport, right? Because times for all that processing has gotten longer. I did hear on the radio this week that the passport wait times are back to the normal of what they were pre-pandemic, but that still doesn't mean that it's fast. About 6 months out, we're into the summer now. If you do need to take any exams, start registering for those so you can start prepping and planning. Consider who your recommenders are going to be so you have some time to manage that relationship and you know exactly who you're going to approach and when. And yeah, 6 months, start drafting your basic essay. Most admissions are going to require a letter of motivation or something like that, or a letter of intent, where you basically describe why you're applying to this university or why do you want to pursue this course of study. You can develop the basic template for that you will modify later on for specific audiences. But yeah, I think it works better if you work on it a little bit at a time over a long period of time and have some time for thought and reflection in between drafts. End of summer, getting ready to start your fall semester. If you're still in school, you need to shortlist those programs, right? This can be time consuming. I know when I applied for master's programs, I applied to only 9. And I say only because I know there are people that applied to many more of that. It was at that point a part-time job, right? And actually for my birthday this year, I got from my parents the money to cover all of the admissions fees. So that is something to consider. Are there going to be admissions fees? And if so, maybe I should restrict myself to 3, 4, or 5 good options. If you need any other kind of documentation, if you need any records of any kind, transcripts, make sure you can get a hold of those, right? We don't want to wait until the last minute to know how long it's going to take to get those. And keep writing. Just keep writing. Getting into the fall, get those applications open. Like I said, they're probably going to be open for 1 or 2 months at most. Really start focusing those drafts. So, okay, I've got 4 different universities I'm applying to. Let me take my base essay and then start modeling it right to those specific universities, right? You can't write a general personal statement and just send it to everyone and hope that it works. Good time to talk to your references. I think 2 months out is more than enough time to let them know what you need from them and when. And then we're into the final home stretch. Make sure the online applications are perfect, that you filled out everything, that you're not confused about any part of it. The wording on some of these applications can be different because they were probably written by somebody for whom English is not their first language. And so you can certainly contact us with questions. We don't do general graduate admissions advising, but we could probably help figure this out with you. Do those final drafts. We should be editing at this point, not generating new content, but fine tuning what we have. Prepare to pay those fees. Make sure you've got enough money in the account. It would be embarrassing to bounce a check on your admissions fee, and then that would delay your admissions, of course, and get those transcripts submitted because that might take a little bit of time. In the days of e-transcripts, that's quite fast now, but not everyone takes those. So, all right, last question. How are we going to do this, right? How are we going to pay for it? I wish I had a simple answer for you, but there's a lot of things to consider. First of all, do understand, as I said, the tuition is potentially lower than it would be in the US. The costs of higher education have skyrocketed in the last generation, right? I think I read somewhere tuition in the US has outpaced inflation 7 times. Um, Graduate study is expensive. You can expect to get assistantships, you can expect to get some help, but you start looking abroad and you'll actually find that there's a number of degrees that are actually free, tuition free in some parts of Europe. Um, some of that depends on your citizenship status. If you're fortunate enough to have joint EU citizenship status, your options improve dramatically. And so maybe we add into the timeline, research my heritage to see if I can get EU citizenship. Um, but by and large, on the balance, um, tuition costs, educational costs outside of the US are nowhere near as expensive as they are here. But cost of living can be substantially higher. Start looking for at rent prices in Dublin right now and tell me what you think. So you do have to balance that out that, yeah, I did get in to this university, but wow. One of the student that's actually on the front page of this presentation, Victoria Crines, she actually did 2 graduate degrees. She didn't she applied for fellowships and didn't get anything, but she went to Cambridge for 1 year. And then she went to Dublin City University for her 2nd year and ended up living in a convent with nuns. She didn't have to become a nun, but she was able to rent a room at a very low price because there were no other housing options within her price range in Dublin. So that's something to consider as well before you leap. Yeah, Iceland is cool. Iceland is fun. A beer is $10 in Iceland, right? So all things to consider. Also, know that there are dozens and dozens and dozens of foreign universities that accept US federal financial aid, which at the graduate level is going to mean loans, right? There are no Pell Grants at the graduate level. There are no just merit scholarships at the graduate level. But there are dozens and dozens of foreign universities that have FAFSA codes. And so included in those resources I'm going to share with you is a list actually from the US Department of Education that lists all of the programs that currently accept US federal financial aid. So you can put that into your FAFSA, you can take out your subsidized student loan, and then that would pay part of your educational costs. So always an option as well. Also, there's fellowships available. First and foremost, many universities actually have merit scholarships they will give to incoming students. They're rare, they're unpredictable, but for 3 years in a row now, I've had students who applied for fellowships, not get them, apply for admission anyway, and then eventually get offered a scholarship by Oxford or whomever. So that is an option, although it's a little unpredictable. So, these fellowships might be coming, as I mentioned, from foreign governments. They could be coming from the universities themselves, or there might be international nonprofits that are supporting awards. If you're thinking about UK, so that's anything in England, Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland, you could apply for something like the Marshall Scholarship, which is tenable anywhere in the UK. The Mitchell Scholarship is tenable anywhere in the Republic of Ireland. So there's 9 major universities there. And then the Fulbright US Student Program, which has about 42 different options for you to fund graduate study in the UK. We'll talk more about Fulbright in a moment. And as well, it funds graduate study in Ireland. There are scholarships that are fixed to specific universities in the UK. So Rhodes is specifically at Oxford. There's the NIH OxCam program for those of you thinking about PhDs or MD PhDs in biomedical studies. Oxford Pershing Square is actually it's a 1+1, so an MBA plus another master's degree. And then Cambridge has a couple of really great options. So we saw a picture of Chris earlier who did a 1-year master's degree at Cambridge through the Churchill Scholarship Program. There are some fellowships for graduate study in other countries as well. A relatively new one is the McCall-McBain Scholarship at McGill University. I sometimes wonder if they picked that name as a joke on us, but there you are. So McGill University is one of the premier research universities in the world in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And this one just opened to US applicants, or excuse me, non-Canadian applicants 2 years ago. So they've been really wonderful to work with. China, oddly enough, there are a couple of national scholarships that would support master's studies in global or China studies. Schwarzman is at Tsinghua University, so I think Joshua mentioned his interest in going there. So Schwarzman would be your hit. And the Yenching Academy at Peking University. And so Camille here was a graduate of our Chinese flagship program at ASU and applied and is currently working on her master's degree at Peking University. If you're interested in Germany, there's a German academic exchange service study scholarship program, and then for Fulbright, you've got 140 countries to choose from. There is a really easy chart on the Fulbright site that shows you which countries would permit you to use a Fulbright award to pay for graduate school. And every year I'm seeing increasing numbers of awards specifically for graduate study at universities in foreign countries. So we've been seeing a real increase in the number of students applying for graduate school funding through Fulbright. So if Fulbright piques your interest, I'd encourage you to go ahead and sign up for our Fulbright Day event later in March. That's just our signal that we're opening advising for that program. This is the largest program with which we work. And this is just before the application for the next cycle opens up. So we'll have a really great info session, alumni panel discussion, and nice networking reception after, where you can ask a lot of questions of us and people that have won the award. So mark your calendars for that for sure. So we walked through a pretty clear timeline, I think, right? So well in advance, really start figuring out what your priorities are. If you're on the pathway to applying this coming December, as you saw, we might be a little bit behind in the planning process. So start working now to get yourself caught up. Think about what your own personal timeline will be. The research is going to take time. This cannot be done in a quick, faster, in a hurry, as my grandmother would say. So start thinking about those criteria and thinking, okay, how am I going to make this choice? What matters most to me? And again, I hope the worksheets that I'll share with you will help you with that. And then start thinking, what are my options for funding? If I'm going to personally fund this, what are the financial plans I need to make? If I'm going to be borrowing, if I'm going to be pursuing fellowships, or perhaps all three. So if you haven't been to our website, and I assume that you have if you're here today, but just know, under the scholarships tab on the ANSA website, we've got a database that you can search through for options, and you can actually delimit the results by identifying graduate programs that will fund graduate study. If you're ready to make an appointment or talk about any specific awards, you can do so through our website. And if you're not already subscribed to our ANSA weekly bulletin, I encourage you to do so, because there's a lot of great information in there every week about upcoming events, deadlines, things like that. So I mentioned Marshall and Rhodes a few times, and we had pictures of several of our recent winners. Just know that we actually do have a pretty early deadline for that. So if you're currently enrolled at ASU, so that is if you're a graduating senior or a rising senior, you need to submit an intent to apply by April 15. And that way we know that you're in process and we can square you away. Our campus deadline is August. The national deadline is September. So if you can think about that, and that's much earlier than the timeline that I discussed with you earlier on, because there's a lot more to do. Likewise with the Fulbright process, application opens April 1. Our campus deadline is September 10. So in between those two dates, you should be doing a lot of work, right? You'll be working closely with myself or Dr. Stoff or Dr. Bhattacharya to get your application up and running and writing multiple drafts. So wonderful. I hope to save plenty of time for questions. So I'm happy to answer any questions y'all have. I'm sure there's many things that I didn't answer already in this presentation. So feel free to pop it in the chat, or you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask the question in the conventional oral way. Anything I can answer for you. Well, great. Lack of questions means either I predicted everything and absolutely crushed it, or I completely overwhelmed you and now your head's spinning. You're not entirely sure what to do next. So, great. Josh asks, if a graduate degree takes fewer years at an international program, what is accelerator not included in the program? Good question. And that's a really, it depends kind of thing. But in most cases, like I said, if we take the UK as an example, a bachelor's degree student from a UK university has been in school for 5 years, and they've already picked their track before they even started. So they're more specialized than, say, a graduate from an American bachelor's degree program. So the academic calendar is different. So you're not really on a 9 or 10 month, you're more like on an 11-month plan. The terms are different. And they also just expect you to do more independent work, right? And so you're not taking as much obligatory coursework as you might an American master's program, and it's not as protracted. So, a good question. They also tend to be far more specialized, right? Narrower in focus. So I see a lot of people that will do 2 one-year master's degrees in combination, which might end up being as comparable to like a traditional master's degree in the US. I didn't mention, but you'll also find a lot of options for part-time study, with the idea that there are working professionals trying to do these as well. I think getting work visas abroad is kind of difficult. And so I've had plenty of students say, "Oh, that's fine. I'll just get a part-time job while I'm there." And like, well, I have had plenty of students get part-time jobs, not necessarily legally, but I didn't say that, and I don't endorse that. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, a really good question. For research and graduate programs, are there databases that can filter out what you would like to study and the schools that offer them? There for the UK, there's one that I use all the time. It's actually on the Marshall Scholarship website. If I remember, I'll try to include that in my follow-up email as well. Outside of the US, it gets, you know, everybody on the internet's trying to make a buck, right? And so there are plenty of websites and databases like masters.org or something like that. I just saw it today when I was kind of doing background research, that can help narrow things down for you. But what you'll eventually find is that everybody wants a piece of you, right? There's a lot of advertising. People want to sell you things. So buyer beware, pay attention to who's sponsoring that, just like anywhere else, some universities might be being paid to get up higher in the search. But yeah, think about how do we narrow this down, right? I would do searches for name of degree, finance, masters, Europe, and start narrowing down from there. There are some world rankings that you can look at to see what universities are ranked highly by reputation. Talking to faculty members, what their opinions are about graduate programs in other countries, because I promise you they collaborate with people in other countries. And then also looking at your bibliographies as you're doing your readings in class and doing your research for yourself. Are there people that are doing research in your area from outside the US? That might be a good lead as to, hey, this program in the UK really does organizational psychology very well. So there's not a super easy or one single database, I think, that does this, but there are several. And just keep your eyes open as you're using those, because like I said, they're trying to make a buck too. Any other questions? Well, I hope you enjoyed this, found it useful. Of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what you need to think about, what you need to do. This was just an introduction. Next week for our Fellowships Friday session, we'll be talking about strategies for getting letters of recommendation. And then beyond that, we'll be talking about personal statements, so you can see how all of these things together, can create a sensible, accumulation of knowledge. And then our final one will be my favorite one, which is harsh truths that will make you a better applicant. So this is where I finally just get real and talk about, based on years and years of working with applicants, what are some mistakes that most people make, and in reality, what do you need to do to be a great applicant for grad school and fellowships and things like that. So Jordan asks, if I want to transfer to an Italian school where the time starts to get more near, would we be able to help with that process? Yeah, we're happy to answer basic questions, but in time allowing, space allowing, we're happy to help with graduate admissions, but we really don't have the capacity to just simply help with graduate school admissions. Like I said, ask, and if it's a good time for us, we can help, but it's a big process and we have to limit what we do with our resources, unfortunately. But yeah, happy to do what we can. Yep. If it's a deadline week, we might say, nope, come back next week. If it's the summer, we might say, yeah, sure. Well, great. Don't hesitate to reach out if we have additional questions. Hope to see you in one of our future information sessions, and more importantly, hope to see you in one of our applicant queues for any number of the fellowships that we work with. So have a great weekend, study hard, rest up, stay healthy, and have a great rest of your semester.